Hi, Pat.
Hi, Cami. How you doing today?
Doing well, doing well. How are you?
I'm doing really well. I'm doing very, very well. Thank you.
I want to talk with you today and hear a little bit about your thoughts on what it means to heal from grief. I feel like this is a controversial topic that's been coming up. And I actually had someone in one of my grief groups comment on something, and she said that I am never healing from grief. And I just thought how that's an interesting thing to ponder. Like, what does healing really mean? When it comes to grief and loss. So just wondering if you could share some insight about what you think about this.
Well, yeah. I just listened to a video of someone who is training grief coaches. And so I listened to it last night because I'm always curious, like, what are people's beliefs and that type of thing. And was she's a woman who has experienced significant child loss and trauma in her life. And she believes that you can totally heal from grief and that the grief can be totally gone, and that what remains is like episodic sadness, that sadness will come. But it's more of just a, kind of a little sadness thing. And then, but the grief is not there.
Mm.
And I struggle myself personally. It's not making her good, bad, or indifferent, but I struggle with that personally because I really do ascribe to, yeah, we use the grieving brain in our certification program, right? And so I really do ascribe to Mary Frances O'Connor's research in regards to what really is going on in our brain. And she stated it in a way that I really liked, that grief will always be a part of us because it's love. So, right. So the grief is there. So healing from grief, do we really want to heal from that relationship, that love, that beautiful peace that we have embedded in our hearts
Mhm.
and the memories and all of that? She also talks about grieving, the act of the verb, the movement,
Mhm.
where that changes over time. So, healing from grief, I try not to use that. And I know a lot of people do use it, like, oh, that, move out of grief to, um, that type of thing. And to me, it's like, it's not about closing the door on it. It's healing to me is that you have awareness, you
Mhm.
have tools to help you when it's, a tough grief moment. And I'll just, I shared with you, but I'll just share real quick. Um, was it last week? It was just last week, I think. So it was the anniversary of my dad's death, and it's been 34 years. And and you and I have talked about this. I didn't really grieve him at the time, and I haven't really spent a lot of time grieving his death, the loss of having my dad physically with me for 34 years. It just doesn't come up very often. And all of a sudden this year, maybe it's because you and I are doing these conversations all the time. That could be it, just an awareness and opening up a little bit of the grief journey. Um, but it was really he was on my mind a lot. And I had a lot of thoughts about that. And my husband and I watched a movie, and it was that A Man Named Otto with Tom Hanks. And I'm watching the movie, and at the end of the movie, Otto dies. And literally, my husband's on the couch. He goes, "Oh, that was a pretty good movie." And my voice cracked. I had to get up and run out of the room because I started sobbing. And it was like, oh my gosh, I don't know what's going on with me. And it was like that, it just brought my dad's death
Mhm.
so in front. And so I had to literally sit in the bathroom and have a sobbing episode and allow myself to do that
Yeah.
for a while. And then I come back out. My husband goes, "Were you crying?" And I'm like, I was just like, I could hardly breathe.
Mhm.
So I don't
Right.
know that it goes away.
Right. Yeah. After all that time, it's like I think those things continuously bubble up. sometimes when we least expect it, and to have the perspective that healing means that that will never happen, to me feels like an unrealistic expectation, because you're allowed to have those episodes. You're allowed to sob when you're thinking about your dad's death. You're allowed to miss them so uncontrollably because it's been years without them and you wonder what life would be like. I
Right.
think there's so many different layers to grief. To say that it's just going to be like healed and done one day is I think harmful for someone who's in their grief, because then they have this expectation that they're bad or they're wrong or they're broken when these things come up, and they need to not be having that experience. And I think that's like with the word healing, that there's an assumption with it that means your wound is just gonna like, it's gonna go away, and like, I don't like, it's gonna be gone, you're not broken anymore. And to me that's unrealistic, and healing means something completely different from my perspective. Like you said, there's an awareness of your grief process, and you have these tools that you use when those episodes come up, or when you're missing them, you have the ways that you can connect and honor them. I think all of those things are ways to heal without trying to dismiss your grief or get rid of it.
Yeah, I just being a nurse, I'm thinking about, you have you have a surgery, or you have an accident where you cut yourself and damage the skin and the tissues and that type of thing. You're going to have a scar.
Mm.
So you can never completely eliminate the scar. I don't know of any great things where you can totally eliminate a scar, because it's the way that the cells knitted back together
Yeah.
after the damage. And so I think that what we do and the work that we do in helping grieving families heal is helping them to knit things back together. So
Mm.
there's going to be some scarring, that's, to be expected, but over that scar, there's this layering of new cells, new energy, new resilience, new strength.
Mm.
Like with a scar, you have new strength, that the wound isn't always opening up all the time, right?
Mhm.
And so I think that to me is the healing part of it, that it's not one and done or it's forever gone.
Mhm.
And so I just, yeah. And so, I started healing family grief. And I had one of my first students in the Confident Grief Coach said, I don't like that term healing.
Mm.
And I said, okay, that's cool. If that over time she came to that, oh, healing actually is what it is. But we're not doing the healing as the support people, as the coaches. We are helping our clients and our communities and whoever's, that we can help, to help them go inside and find ways to, like we said, find the resources, the tools, the awareness, so that they can start knitting those cells back together. That fabric, sewing it back together. Is it going to be perfect? No. Is there still going to have, this sadness at times, deep sadness, and the grieving will show up. And so
Mhm.
that to me is the healing piece of it.
I love that imagery of like that wound, an open cut or something, like being knitted back together, and the newness and how the cells can join, and that growth that happens around the accident or the wound. It's like, it's not that it's going to be open and gushing forever. Like, your body's going to continue to heal, do its own healing process
Right.
around this event or the wound. But that doesn't mean that it didn't happen. It doesn't mean that it's like you're not going to have that scar tissue or feel that impact from that event in your body. Like, that's still very much going to be there. And like, you're not going to be actively bleeding all the time.
Right.
Right? Like, it's like, I think that perspective of like that growth and that integration, or that knitting, like you said, of this experience now with the rest of your life. Like, what does this look like for you now as you're incorporating these experiences into your life moving forward. So that's
Right.
beautiful.
And so when we talk, because you and I, we both believe that people are not broken when they're grieving. It's not, but their hearts feel broken. Sometimes they feel really broken and shattered, but it's, there is that healing capability. But again, it's like there's that Japanese, and I don't ever know how to say it, but it's kintsugo or something like that, where they take pottery or dishes and they would take these pieces back together and then they would glue them, fuse them back together, and then line the cracks with gold.
Oh, cool.
And it's very cool because it's such a great representation. And I probably totally butchered how you say it, but that's what I see is that you can feel really broken, but then it fuses back together. And if we can find the support, the tools, the purpose back in our lives, it's like we start lining those scars with gold
Mm.
and light
Oh,
and
yeah.
beautiful. Yeah.
Yeah, sort of filling in that gap that made you feel shattered or in pieces. And and for me personally, I think a part of the healing process in grief is very much that stage when we're a puddle and we're broken and we feel like a mess and we're shattered and nothing makes sense. Like that is very much an important part of the process, and to try to not have that experience because we think that we shouldn't, because we feel ashamed of feeling like we need support or we need help or we're a mess. Like it's important for me to normalize that is very much like a part of the healing process, is to completely crumble and fall apart. And there's
Yeah.
nothing like wrong or bad about it. It's just a part of the process, and it's a part of that shadow work or the uncomfortable parts of our life experience that we don't really want to be having, but they happen. And when we can be there for the depths of that experience, that is where you find your healing. When you can dive deep into that and
Yep.
feel your pain and feel the impact of your loss, I am all for all of that. Like going in there, it's kind of like when you're thinking about a wound, it's like you're going to have to pour some alcohol on it or get the dirt out of there, whatever it
Yep,
is.
yep,
Like
yep, yep.
it's going to sting. Like that is
Yeah, it hurts.
not a
Yeah.
fun process, but
Right.
it's also a really important part of the process, because it's not going to heal correctly if you pretend like there's not dirt. If you pretend like there's not dirt in your wound and you try to put band-aids over it and just pretend like it's not as bad as it is, then it's like going to get infected and create more issues. So I think that deep
Yep.
dive into that messy part of grief is very much a part of the healing process. And
Yeah. Yeah.
for me, I found when I dismissed that part, when I didn't allow myself to grieve, I spent 10 years avoiding my grief. It was like that wound was really infected, and it was like all this stuff was just wanting to come out and burst. And later, I found myself grieving what I didn't allow myself to grieve before. So even years later, like the tears and the memories and all these things that I had been avoiding, like they're still very much like, now it's like you have to go and tend to that wound because
Right.
it's
Yeah.
gonna
Because you
have
don't
to
want to
happen
get
at some
septic.
point.
You don't want to, sepsis can kill us. And so to have a grief that moves into sepsis because we haven't dealt with the dirt and the muck and all the stuff that's causing the inflammation and that type of thing, it could have the death of your soul,
Mhm.
and I've seen that in people. I've seen it where it's just like, yeah, that's really a good um picture to paint in our minds. And then you were talking about, we need to tend to it. And yeah, I briefly mentioned this to you. I believe that I'm a mindset kind of girl. I'm like, okay, if I put my mind to this, or I'm going to work through this, and that there is a piece of mind over matter, from that perspective, that emotions do create a lot of physical challenges for us and that type of thing. But also there has been, this body of thought of, it's not mindset. I think, what do you call it again? Limiting
Uh,
beliefs,
yeah.
limiting beliefs, and that some people, coaches, therapists, maybe too, are going out there and saying, well, you need to come and we've got to shift these limiting beliefs of yours. And to me, it's like, I think there's a piece of it, like in coaching, what we do is we will take a look at reframing, which is kind of like could be a limiting belief. But I know that there's some coaching programs where that's all about that we're going to really address your limiting beliefs and that type of thing. When you do that with someone who's grieving or others, I mentioned to you that I know someone that has autism, and she went to some pretty renowned coaching that someone who's very well known out in the coaching industry and limiting beliefs, and it actually hurt her because she had to mask more because she just saw that she was not right. There was something wrong
Mhm.
with her. And so I just caution that I think that there's some great tools out there and people that are very good at what they do and doing it in the right way. But when people are grieving, to go in and telling, yourself that the way that you're thinking and feeling is wrong
Mm.
can be very damaging. And so
Mhm.
I really caution people that you do your research, if you're going to use some of that. I would prefer to see someone use tapping or different things like that, that it's still kind of a little bit of limiting belief kind of thought change, but it's not so much that, it's making you bad or wrong.
Right. Yeah, I think there's a big difference when we're talking about language and the way that we tell our story in grief, the words that we use to describe what we're experiencing, and the awareness that can be had when we're telling our story to recognize, is this true? Like, is this really what I think about my story? Because I think in grief brain, sometimes that story can get really skewed, and we might really believe something about the situation that actually like wasn't true. So I think challenging some of those beliefs in that way can be powerful because they might really be imprisoning us
Right,
and
right.
inhibiting our growth forward. Something that I mentioned at the very opening of this was how I see from people stating that they will never heal from their grief. And I like to challenge that sometimes while also acknowledging that, yeah, you feel like things are never going to change right now. Like you're deep in that despair.
Right.
And I see you in that. I see your pain. That's valid. That's 100% like you're allowed to have that experience. And at the same time, to write that off on determining that our future is going to be this way forever by the words that we're speaking now about it, I think that's a limiting belief. It's
Yep,
like
yep.
if you are stating that you are never going to get better, then you probably won't get better.
Right.
And that's, I think, where we can challenge the words that we say and the way that we tell our story in order to change our situation and to feel empowered about the things that we can do to not feel so lost in that despair for the rest of our lives.
Right. And I know that we talk about reframing, and that's one of the components of the breathe coaching model for grief is reframing some of those challenging thoughts or things that might be stopping us. How might you be able to take a look at this a little bit differently? How might you be able to tell your story in a different way, in a way that it feels better for you? I was helping and coaching some parents where their child died by suicide, and the picture of their son who had died by gunshot was what was there all the time, and that was the story. And so in working with them, it was like, how might you be able to rethink that story and retell that story in a different way to help get that visual out of your mind's eye and really think about this story in a different way. And they were able to do it. They were able to shift it in a way that, wow, he was really hurting. He had a lot of physical challenges, that this was an event, not well thought out, but just like, a quick event without thinking about it, and may have had the physical challenges clouding the thought. And once they were able to do that, the compassion that they were able to feel for their son then flowed back into them, and they were able to, take that tough visual that they always had in their head,
Mhm.
in their mind's eye, and change it up. And it really was a transformative,
Mm.
you know, piece for them, and with that reframing, which could be like, a little bit on the limiting beliefs and that type of thing. I think that there's a balance with all of this, right? There's good stuff, and I think that there's really valuable, but understanding, and for people who are out there coaching and doing some of this limiting belief work, if you're working with someone who's grieving, is just be cognizant of not challenging that they're bad and wrong, that their
Right.
beliefs are wrong, but challenging maybe that, yeah, like you said, if I say, I'm going to always be this way, I'm going to always be this way.
Mhm.
I will always be this way. If I
Yeah.
say there's never no way I can ever do this, then there's no way that I'll ever be able to do this, because our minds and our bodies and all of that does limit us.
Man, I was just gonna say something and now I can't remember what it was.
I talk too much.
No, I was like so involved in what you were saying, and now I was like, oh well, there it goes. But okay, that's okay. Maybe it'll come back.
Yeah, yeah.
Um anyway, I wanna ask you a little bit about, like, from your clients that go through the breathe program for grief and the certification program, what are some of the changes and ways that you see their healing journey through grief showing up throughout the course of the program?
Oh, wow. It's just pretty amazing. I just finished a program with an individual, and she actually took the program as part of finishing up her PhD and her dissertation and stuff, because she wanted to bring grief and some of that into the model. And so we did the 8-week breathe coaching model. And she had a lot of different grief, loss of job, loss of the identity that she had for 30 years in her job. She had been adopted. There was abandonment issues. There was, divorce. All this kind of grief events in her life culminated. And so as we just started to explore, and I would say the biggest aha for her was when we were doing it was the reframing. Interesting. Now that
Hmm.
because that's kind of what we're talking about, and the honoring. And she realized that she never grieved her adopted father. And she was always angry at him, and he was like unhealthy and, you know, um, disabled and all of this different stuff. And she just saw him in this really challenging light, because this was the life, she was caretaking as a young girl at 8, 9 years old. So there's a lot of kind of bitterness about that. And we just ended the 8-week program last week. And she said, I think that was the biggest thing, because she said, I had some back pain and it was really, really tough on me. And, and all of a sudden I realized, wow, this could have been what it was like for my father. And so empathy came and compassion that hadn't been there before. And she's like, wow, I could really see, because I was experiencing myself, only imagine how difficult it must have been for him all those years. So that was really transformative. And you know that in our program, in the certification program, I've actually developed, one's a typical coaching program. Sometimes they'll call it like the wheel of life, that type of thing. I call it the life engagement exercise. We look at 7 areas in someone's life and have them rate those areas at the very beginning just to see, what's their baseline when they're coming into coaching. And then there's another one that I actually created out of my knowledge of and training with my grandmaster Chunyi Lin and Spring Forest Qigong and the whole Qigong aspect and ancient Chinese wisdom, and it has to do with the emotions and how emotions impact our physical body. So I actually have people rate the 5 big emotions with that when they start. And then we do a check-in in the midpoint of the 8 weeks to see how people are doing on their life engagement, all these areas, and these challenging emotions. I don't like to call them negative because I think emotions are necessary in so many ways. And then we check it after at that 8th session. And it's so amazing. I mean, it's so amazing. So I have hers here. And at week 1, her life engagement, so how much she's just really engaged in life and feeling good about things, she was at a 39% out of a potential 100%. Pretty low. Things were feeling dark for her and a lot of stuff going on. By mid time, our 4th week, it had jumped up to 59%. So now she's like, oh, things are looking a little bit brighter. There are some areas that I've really made a change to because through the coaching process. And when we ended on that last week, 9 weeks later, she was at a 77% of life engagement.
Mm.
And it's interesting because she didn't necessarily see that in herself until all of a sudden we did that. And I started sharing how her perception was when she first came in and in the middle. And she's like, oh my gosh. And she just lit up because it was just like, wow, I have been doing some good stuff here. And then on her emotional barometer, when she first came, the higher the number, the more these challenging emotions are just riding in your life constantly. She was at a 66%. So it was pretty heavy duty. A lot of these emotions, her grief, her fear, her anger, just all of that was just like a muddied, messy, mess that we talked about earlier. Then it went down to 50% by the midpoint. But by the time we closed out our sessions at the 8th or 9th week, whatever it was, she was down to 38%, which means that these emotions that were so all encompassing and taking over 2/3 of her life, right, now are down to, much less, maybe a quarter, a third of her life. So, I mean, it's like amazing when you see that transformation, and it all is about finding the tools and the resources and being in that, as you talked earlier, being in the depth of it and exploring it and cleaning out the wounds, get the dirt out so that you can start knitting your life back together.
That's beautiful. And yeah, that's mind blowing that so much progress can happen in just 2 months,
Yeah.
8 or 9 weeks. Like this person has completely changed their life through the coaching process and by diving into the stuff that we often don't want to explore
Yep.
because it's painful. It's like, well, what if healing really was about exploring the stuff that hurts so bad that we need to kind of get in there and figure out, okay, how do we start to tend to this wound in a way that we can patch it up a little bit and keep going with our life in a way that's going to have meaning and purpose. So thanks for sharing that. That's incredible.
Yeah. And I just thinking about that whole episode with my dad, once I sat down and stopped and the tears are flowing and just like, where is this all coming from? It was so awful. But then when I sat back, I thought my tears and my sadness were not only for myself, because I felt robbed of having him in my life, because I've been alive longer and I've had more time without him than I had with him because he died, fairly young. And also, my sadness was for him and that inability to watch the family that he had helped create and to meet to the grandkids and to just see how this beautiful family has expanded and grown. And so my grief was not just for me, but also for him, and that emptiness kind of from my age of 31 to my age of almost 66, I mean, so, and that was okay. So the grieving was there. The grief is still there, but it's not as, tough.
Yeah.
And I explored it more quickly because this is what I do, right? I know the
Mhm.
tools.
Yeah. I love that you said, the grief is there and that's okay. It's not that the grief is okay. It's not bad. It gets to
Yeah.
be there. It gets to exist. It gets to move through you and you get to have those episodes while also having that awareness that you can reflect and figure out, okay, well, what is this really about? What am I feeling right now? You realized it wasn't even for you in some way. It was for your dad and all the things that he's missing out on. And I think that's beautiful that, through that you've learned this ability to have that awareness and the recognition and to dive into what does this really mean to you while also having the tools of like, okay, well, I know how to best support myself when this comes up. And that
Yep.
confidence that comes, that empowerment that comes with that, I think is really where the healing comes from. Like, okay, I know how to meet my grief. I know how to bring it with me in my life. I don't have to try to get rid of it. It gets to be there because I'm always going to love my person. And that's so beautiful.
And isn't that why we do what we do? I mean, it's like, it isn't about what we do, it's about how our clients, I've always said, I just wish that I had a time lapse camera or whatever, where it shows like the trajectory over that 8-week period of time, or however long. Yours is longer because you incorporate a lot more things in with your clients. But just to see that shift
Mhm.
physically in them and in their words and their energy, it's just like, you just like, oh, this is why we do what we do, because we can see that we can support people to live their lives fully and have joy.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And that's what healing is about. And
Yeah.
we're not the ones doing that for people. It's empowering because it's each person learning about themselves and their grief and their life and what life and death means to them. And it's like such an intense process. Yet it's like when we can really get in there and explore it, like, yeah, that's life changing.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
So, Pat, how can people get involved if they want to learn this breathe model for grief and become a coach to help other people through this process?
Well, actually, in the show notes, both your information is in there, but there also is the information to go over to healingfamilygrief.com, where we have, yeah, so we use the healing healingfamilygrief.com, where people can just explore the certification program. And there's 2 different levels. I had someone reach out to me yesterday saying, do I have to be a certified coach to come to this program? And it's like, no, you don't have to be. We teach you how to do this and actually model and have you practice how to be a coach. But if people do want to go that next level, we actually have certification or approval or accreditation, whatever you want to call it, from the International Coaching Federation. So we have the full program too, if people want to be an advanced certified coach like you are, and then, want to go on to be certified through the International Coaching Federation. So it's kind of like whatever people want to do. We
Mhm.
have the options there for people. So yeah.
I love that. I love that the breathe coaching model for grief. Of course, when you're in the program and you're someone who has an experience of grief and loss, how you get to really feel how that program works for yourself and go through that program and be coached by other people and to really take it in and see that transformation for yourself. So that's what I really adore about this program, is because it is perfect for the people who have been through the grief and loss and they want to help other people too. And
Yep.
it's like you get to benefit from the program, and then obviously you get to share it with other people and just spread that love throughout the world. And you don't have to be a therapist or a professional someone. It's like, no, like if you have this desire, there's an option for you to learn how to do it and to really make an impact in other people's lives. And that confidence that comes with just a little bit more know-how on what does this toolbox even look like? How do you tend to that wound when it's
Yep.
just
Yep.
gushing and full of dirt? It's like, okay, let's start here. And I think the Breathe program is like the perfect place to start for people who have that desire to really help other people. So thanks
Yep.
for offering yet another cohort coming up in spring. I'm looking forward to
I know it's going to be
being a
here
part of
before you
that.
know it, at the beginning of April. So I'm really excited about that. Just amazing people, and we've had people come throughout the world, and so yeah, it's a joy. It's a joy to be able to know, our vision is to create, accessible and transformative healing for grieving families throughout the world. And the accessibility is we need to have people that are trained in their cultures, in their languages, that type of thing. So it's not just, here in the United States, but we have yeah, it's been growing and growing dramatically, and it's just a joy to know that people are out there and the grief isn't going away. We have so much going on in our world, in our country. Just today, my brother-in-law posted on Facebook about a young woman who was in nursing school with his daughter who was murdered on campus. And it's just like, well, I just went right into the family and the siblings, right? And just, you know, that it's such a difficult time, and they're going to need that support, not only just now, but down the road when all of a sudden the fog lifts and it's like, okay, where do we go from here? So yeah. And thank you for all that you do. I'm really excited about all that you're in. And tell people a little bit about, you just started a Facebook group that is kind of an all-encompassing one. And I see people are just joining left and right. Can you just give a quick shout out to that?
Sure, yeah. You can find it on Facebook. It's called Grief Support: Navigating Life After Loss, and it's an open group. So as a grief coach, a limiting part of Facebook that I was finding was that you are pretty limited and restricted when it comes to joining other Facebook groups to meet other grief coaches, to meet other grievers, and to just be a part of that community. It was very like I don't know, there's almost like an ownership around these grief groups that the moderator doesn't really want other grief support people in the space. So I've created a group where, whether you're a therapist or a grief coach or a griever or someone who wants to help other people in grief, it's an open space for anybody to join. So my goal is to just have a hub of resources. So if you are seeking support for grief and navigating life after loss and all of the changes, that you're going to see so many tools right here for you, so many different people that can help, so many free resources and downloadable things and podcasts and episodes and books and all these things that are just at your fingertips to explore. So it's really a space to support other people and to receive support as well. So I'm excited to offer that because everybody's invited. I'm not owning the group or, taking charge of things. I'm going to make sure that it's a safe space, of course. But it's really open to anyone and everyone who wants to be a part of healing from grief and figuring out what those next steps are like.
Beautiful, beautiful. Well, thank you for all that you do too. I appreciate it.
Thanks, Pat. Yeah, we're gonna keep shining this light no matter how much grief and all of the heartbreak in the world. We got to meet that with this radiant light that we're shining. So thank you for being a radiant human. And I'm looking forward to being on our next cohort for this new group of coaches in the springtime that's coming up soon. So if you're out there and you wanna be in class with us, let us know, because spots are filling up quickly.
Yep. Well, thanks, darling. We will talk to you soon. And thanks everybody for listening. We appreciate you.
Thanks. Bye.
Peace out. Bye.